She had known within 24 hours. Not from the letter had been confirmation, the specific physical evidence of something she had already understood from the way Sylvia's eyes moved across the entrance hall when Arthur brought her through the doors. Eleanor had been at the top of the stairs when they arrived. She had not been waiting there. She had been coming from the library, which was where she spent her mornings, and the timing had been the specific timing of a house that she ran with thorough efficiency, which meant she knew when arrivals were expected and had not needed to position herself. She had simply been there. She had watched Sylvia come through the door. She had watched the eyes go up, to the chandelier first, which was the specific movement of a woman who was assessing the value of a space, rather than appreciating it, the rapid inventory of someone who was calculating what the chandelier cost and what it meant about what else the house contained. Then the eyes had moved to Arthur. Not the way a cousin's eyes move to a cousin, the specific proprietary quality of a woman looking at a man she considered hers, checking his face for the nervousness she expected, and finding it, and communicating, in the fraction of a second of eye contact, a specific message that Eleanor had read from 30 feet above with the particular clarity of a woman who had spent 12 years reading rooms for a living. She had read the message. She had come downstairs. She had said the appropriate things with the warmth appropriate to a relation who had fallen on difficult times, and she had watched Arthur's hand go to Sylvia's waist. Briefly, the instinctive touch of a man whose body had not caught up with the specific situation he had constructed, and she had noted the touch with the even quality she brought to all information she was filing. She had smiled at Sylvia. "Welcome to your new home, dear cousin," she had said. Sylvia had smiled back. Neither of them had been performing warmth. Eleanor had gone back to the library. She had found the letter that afternoon, in the lining of Arthur's traveling coat that had been sent to the laundry. Not searching, simply supervising the household management that was her specific responsibility, and that she performed with the thoroughness she performed all things. And the letter had been there, tucked with the specific care of a man who was thorough about concealment, and who had not anticipated his wife's particular relationship to the household's operations. She had read it. She had put it back. She had gone to her desk. She had thought about her available options, which was the specific discipline she brought to problems that had large stakes, the same discipline she had brought to every significant decision of her 12-year marriage, to a man who was not as intelligent as he believed himself to be, and who had consequently never understood that the person most thoroughly managing the estate was not him. She had thought for 3 hours. She had arrived at the approach that the situation deserved. She had not screamed. She had not wept. She had not confronted. She had begun to plan. But before we go to the ruby necklace, before we sit at the morning tea table and watch Eleanor wear the family heirloom and sigh about what Arthur did and did not provide to his true family line, I need to ask you something. If you discovered that your husband had installed his mistress in your house under a false identity, and you understood that confrontation would allow him to construct better lies, what would you do with the knowing? Drop your answer in the comments, because Eleanor understood something that most people in her position did not understand, which was that the most dangerous thing she could do was nothing that looked like a threat. She did nothing that looked like a threat. She did everything else. Subscribe and hit the bell. And tell me where you are watching from tonight, your city, your country. Let me know who is in the room. Now, let's begin. Eleanor Ashwood had married Arthur at 22, which was the age at which she had not yet fully understood the specific taxonomy of men who presented as capable and who were, in the actual operation of their lives, primarily concerned with the maintenance of their appearance of capability. She had understood it by 24, which was where she was now. She had organized an entire life around this understanding, with the specific patient competence of a woman who had assessed her situation accurately and had determined that the most effective response was to make herself indispensable in ways that were invisible to him. She managed the estate. Not in the nominal sense of a duchess overseeing the domestic staff, in the specific, comprehensive sense of someone who understood the estate's finances, its legal obligations, its social calendar, its political relationships, the particular web of obligation and alliance that kept a significant property functioning, and that Arthur believed he managed because he attended the meetings that she had organized, and spoke the words that she had prepared, and received the credit for the outcomes she had produced. She had decided, at 24, that this was the specific situation she was in, and that she could leave it, or she could manage it, and she had assessed the available options with the honest precision she brought to all assessments, and had concluded that managing it was the more interesting choice. She had discovered, in the years of the management, extraordinarily good at managing things. The estate had flourished. Arthur had received the credit. She had received the specific quiet satisfaction of watching a complex system she had built operate at the level she had designed it for, which was not nothing. It was, in fact, the particular satisfaction of competence applied at scale, and she had found it sufficient for most years. Then Arthur had met Sylvia. This had been 8 months ago, at the Cavendish house party in September, which Eleanor had not attended because she had been managing a significant issue with the Northern tenant holdings that had required her presence on the estate, while Arthur enjoyed the Cavendish hospitality. She had understood, when he returned from the house party with the specific quality of a man who had been changed by something he was not going to disclose, that something had happened. She had not pressed. She had watched. She had assembled the picture across 3 months of watching, with the systematic attention she brought to all pictures she was assembling, and the picture had told her several things. The first thing, Arthur had acquired a significant emotional attachment to someone he had met at the Cavendish party. The second thing, the attachment was not the casual variety that men of his social standing sometimes developed, and that generally resolved themselves without significant consequence. The third thing, the attachment was being managed by the other party more deliberately than Arthur was managing it, which was the specific signature of a woman who understood that her leverage was the attachment, and who was therefore managing it strategically. She had understood, from the third thing, that the other party was someone to take seriously. She had taken her seriously. She had also, across the 3 months before Sylvia arrived, been doing the specific preparatory work that her instincts told her the situation was going to require. She had reviewed the estate's legal position with her solicitor, quietly and under the guise of routine annual review. She had organized the financial documentation with the specific completeness of someone who wanted a thorough record. She had made certain that the household staff understood, without explicit instruction, that their primary professional loyalty was to the Duchess, which was the loyalty it had always been, and which she had maintained through the specific, consistent quality of being the person who actually managed their working lives. She had been ready when Arthur arrived with Sylvia in tow. She had been ready, and she had not shown it, which was the specific preparedness of someone who understood that the advantage of readiness was only valuable as long as it was invisible. Sylvia moved through the estate with the quality of a woman who was inventorying it. Eleanor watched this with the attending quality she brought to everything, and noted the specific pattern of it, the lingering near the silver, the particular attention to the display cases in the East Gallery, the way Sylvia's eyes moved across the dinner table's centerpiece with the inventory expression rather than the appreciation expression. She was calculating what it was worth. She was calculating what it would be worth to her, specifically, if she occupied the position that Eleanor currently occupied. Eleanor found this useful information. She also found Sylvia, in the honest accounting of someone who assessed people accurately, to be less sophisticated than she had anticipated, not unintelligent, but intelligent in the specific narrow way of someone whose intelligence had been entirely directed toward the acquisition of things rather than toward the broader understanding of systems. Sylvia understood desire. She did not understand strategy. This was the gap Eleanor was going to use. She began on the third morning. The morning tea was in the east parlor, which had the best light at that hour, and which was where Eleanor held the household's social occasions, with a quality that the neighboring estates had been attempting to replicate for years. She wore the ruby necklace. It was genuine, the specific genuine quality of something that had been in the family for 4 generations, and that communicated, simply by existing, the particular weight of an inheritance that was not acquired, but transmitted, that could not be purchased because its value was not primarily monetary. Sylvia arrived in a pale morning dress that was good but not exceptional, with the specific quality of someone who had the resources to be well dressed, but not the resources to be dressed in the way that the East Parlor at this hour required. Eleanor watched Sylvia see the necklace. She watched the inventory expression activate. She waited for the appropriate moment, the specific moment of tea being poured, and the conversation at that particular lull that morning teas always produced, and she sighed. "Oh, Sylvia," she said, with the warm regret of a woman sharing something slightly uncomfortable with a member of the family. "It is such a pity Arthur only provides such rare jewels for his true family line." Sylvia looked at the necklace. Eleanor looked at Sylvia, looking at the necklace. He told me just yesterday, Eleanor continued, in the casual quality of someone sharing ordinary domestic information, that he could never waste such fortune on mere distant cousins. The word distant had done its specific work. Eleanor had chosen it with the precision she used for all her instruments. Not cousin, not family, not relative. Distant. The specific modifier that communicated a hierarchy, a distance, a limit on what could be claimed. Sylvia had smiled. Eleanor had smiled back. The tea had continued. That evening, she had positioned herself near the closed door of Arthur's study, with the quiet quality of someone who had business nearby, and who was not specifically attending to what was happening inside the study. She heard Sylvia's voice, which had the quality she had anticipated, the high, specific quality of a woman who has been told something that has activated her envy, and who is delivering the consequence of the activation. "You gave her rubies," Sylvia said, with the quality of a woman who was not going to accept this as a statement of fact, but as an accusation. "She is my wife," Arthur said, with the quality of a man who was managing a situation he had not anticipated managing this evening. "Your wife," Sylvia said, "not me. I am here in this house as your cousin, wearing dresses that are not good enough for morning tea, watching your wife wear rubies and listening to her imply that I am beneath consideration for anything valuable." There was a silence. "I need a diamond necklace," Sylvia said. "I need it immediately. Something that exceeds anything Eleanor owns." There was a longer silence. Sylvia, now Arthur. She had heard the specific quality of a man who was going to do the thing he was being told to do, because doing it was less immediately painful than not doing it. She had moved away from the door. She had gone to the library. She had made a note in the ledger she kept that was not the estate ledger, but her private account of the proceedings, which she was maintaining with the thoroughness of someone who understood that records were instruments, and instruments required maintenance. She had written, "Diamond necklace, family vault, Arthur." She had written the date. The whisper to Sylvia had required the specific management of timing and location. Eleanor had chosen the embroidery afternoon, which was the specific occasion that the household's women participated in, and that offered the particular intimacy of side-by-side occupation that made conversation feel casual when it was not. They had been sitting beside each other over their work when Eleanor had looked up from the embroidery with the expression of someone sharing information she had perhaps not intended to share. "Arthur is so devoted to our marriage," she said. Sylvia looked up. "He told me something last night," Eleanor continued, with the quality of a wife who was perhaps slightly indiscreet about the domestic conversations, about his intentions for next month. Sylvia had gone very still. "He has found what he believes is an excellent match," Eleanor said. "A wealthy baron in Scotland. He says the remoteness is an advantage. It keeps certain arrangements from being too visible to the London social world." She had picked up her embroidery. "He said it's the best way to get things settled." She had used the phrase with the specific, deliberate quality of someone who was choosing words carefully and letting the choosing be slightly visible, so that Sylvia understood she was receiving something real. "I should not have said anything," Eleanor added, with the quality of a woman who was already retreating from the disclosure. "No, please," Sylvia said. Her voice had the specific quality of someone who was performing composure over a significant interior disturbance. "Please, don't concern yourself. I appreciate your honesty." Eleanor had looked at her with warm sincerity. "Of course, dear cousin," she said. "We are family, after all." The whisper to Arthur had required a different instrument. She had gone to him in the evening when he was reviewing the papers she had prepared for him, which was the specific domestic routine that organized their evenings. She prepared, he reviewed, he received the credit. She had sat down across from him with the quality of a woman who had something pleasant to share. "Your cousin is delightful company," she said. He had looked up from the papers. "She has been very charming with the household staff," Eleanor continued. "They are quite taken with her." He had made the appropriate sound. "It is such a shame," Eleanor said, "that she cannot be entirely honest in her situation here." Arthur had gone very still. "What do you mean?" he said. Eleanor had looked slightly uncertain, the specific quality of someone who was not certain they should be sharing something. "Only what she mentioned to Mr. Harrow," she said. Mr. Harrow was the head butler, which was the specific detail that made the information credible. A conversation with the head butler was a conversation that was semi-official, that had weight. Arthur was looking at her. "She told him," Eleanor said, with the reluctant quality of a wife being honest with her husband about something uncomfortable, that she only stays here for the financial arrangements, that she finds the country and the company, she paused, entirely tedious. She had watched him receive this. She also mentioned, Eleanor continued, more quietly, a young officer, in London. She has apparently been corresponding with him quite regularly. She had folded her hands. I am sure it is nothing, she said. I simply thought you should know, as she is a guest under your care. She had stood. I should not have said anything, she said. Forgive me. She had left him with the papers, and the specific quality of a man who was no longer thinking about the papers. The dinner party had been planned for this particular Saturday for 6 weeks, which was the planning timeline that significant dinner parties at the estate required, and which Eleanor had been working within, without the guests' knowledge that the timeline's specific endpoint had been organized around the specific development of the events she was managing. The guest list was the particular list she had assembled, not for social reasons, though the social reasons were real, but for the specific institutional presence that the list contained. Lord Magistrate Aldworth, 2 of his senior colleagues, 3 of the most significant social arbiters of the county, the Bishop of Millfield, the editor of the county social register. She had been building this guest list for 3 weeks, since the specific point at which she had understood that the natural momentum of what she had set in motion was approaching its conclusion, and that the conclusion required the appropriate witnesses. She had organized the seating with her usual thoroughness, which was the thoroughness that produced the particular quality of her dinner parties, the conversations that happened because she had understood who should sit near whom and had arranged accordingly. Sylvia was placed to Arthur's right. Eleanor was at the head of the table. The necklace had been the specific instrument she had chosen for the evening's central event. When Arthur had taken it from the vault, which she had known he would do, which the note in her private ledger had recorded, she had tracked its location through the household's ordinary monitoring of valuable items, which was part of the estate management that she conducted, and that had told her the necklace was wrapped and in Arthur's traveling case, which suggested he intended to give it to Sylvia away from the estate. She had redirected it, not dramatically. Through the specific ordinary machinery of household management, she had ensured that the package was intercepted in the course of the routine handling of the house's deliveries and correspondence, which was something she oversaw, and had ensured it was delivered to the dining table at the specific moment of the dinner's second course, which was the moment she had assessed as optimal. She had told the servant precisely how to deliver it. She had not told the servant what it contained or why the timing mattered. She had simply given the instruction with the specific quality of instructions that were followed, because she was the person who gave instructions in this house, and they were always followed, and the servant had not questioned it. The package arrived between the second and third course, which was the specific moment she had chosen, because it was the moment when the wine had been with the guests long enough to have its effect, and when the formal structure of the dinner was at its most relaxed, which was when the specific social containment that formal dinners provided was thinnest. She had watched the servant place it. She had watched Arthur see it. She had watched his face do the specific sequence of a man who recognized what was being placed on the table, and who did not understand why it was being placed on the table, and whose lack of understanding was producing the rapid and not very effective calculation of a man trying to manage a situation with insufficient information. She had watched Sylvia see it. She had watched Sylvia's face do the specific sequence of a woman who had been drinking wine for 2 hours while managing the specific interior pressure of believing that Arthur was planning to send her to Scotland, and that the London officer's story might somehow have reached him, and that every exchange at the table had had the quality of potential exposure, and who had arrived at the specific breaking point of a woman whose containment had been under maximum pressure for 3 hours. She had watched Sylvia open her mouth. You absolute liar. The quality of it, the specific carrying quality of a voice that had given up the management of its volume, was the quality she had anticipated. The table went quiet. Sylvia was standing. You told me these diamonds were mine. The room had the specific quality of a formal dinner that has received something it had not expected and that does not yet know what to do with what it has received. You swore you were going to divorce Eleanor and make me your duchess, not send me to Scotland. The quality of the silence changed. Not send me to Scotland. The magistrates were now looking at each other with the specific quality of people exchanging professional information through eye contact alone. Arthur had stood. Eleanor had recognized this, the specific standing of a man who had been drinking for 2 hours and who was managing the simultaneous pressures of the Scotland accusation, which he did not understand, but which activated the paranoia she had planted, and the public exposure, and the complete loss of control of a situation he had never actually controlled. "Shut your mouth, you greedy wretch." The room received this with the quality of 36 people simultaneously understanding that they were present for something significant. "I brought you into my house as my cousin to protect you, and you dare accuse me while you plan to steal my gold for your secret lover." The specific phrase, "brought you into my house as my cousin," had the quality of a confession delivered by a man who had lost track of what he was confessing in the pressure of confessing it. The room understood. She had watched the understanding arrive across the faces of the magistrates, who were professionals in the specific business of receiving and processing admissions, and who were processing this one with the attending quality of men who were already organizing what they had heard into the categories that their work required. Lord Magistrate Aldworth had set down his fork. The Bishop of Millfield had folded his hands. The editor of the county social register was looking at Arthur with the expression of a man who was composing something. Sylvia and Arthur were still shouting. She had let them continue for exactly as long as they needed to continue, which was until they had exhausted the specific fuel of the specific accusations and had arrived at the particular silence of two people who had said the things they were going to say, and who were now, in the quiet, beginning to understand what they had said, and in front of whom she had stood. She had stood with the specific quality of a woman who was entirely at home in her own dining room, and who had simply decided that the moment had arrived to say the thing that needed to be said. She had not looked at Arthur. She had not looked at Sylvia. She had looked at Lord Magistrate Aldworth because he was the person whose institutional presence was the most relevant to what happened next, and because directing the address to him communicated several things simultaneously, all of them correct. "It seems my husband and his cousin," she said. The pause before and after cousin had the specific quality of a pause that communicated everything the word was now understood to mean. "You have a great deal of legal matters to settle." She had looked at the table, the assembled lords and magistrates and social arbiters, the bishop, the editor. "Forgive me, my lords," she said. "I shall leave them to their confessions." She had turned. She had walked toward the door. She had heard, behind her, the specific quality of a room in which two people who have publicly confessed to fraud, theft, and adultery in front of a table of magistrates are being addressed by those magistrates. She had not looked back. She had gone to the balcony. The balcony at night had the quality of the estate in its best form, the gardens below, the specific June air, the dark beyond the formal grounds where the estate's land continued further than the light reached. She had poured champagne. She had stood. She had heard, below and inside, the specific movements of a situation being managed by the appropriate institutional machinery, the voices of the magistrates organizing what they had witnessed into the specific formal language of what came next, the particular quality of Arthur's voice moving from the register of a man who had been shouting to the register of a man who was understanding the dimensions of what he had said and in front of whom. She had not felt triumph. She was honest with herself about this. Triumph was available to her and was not the primary thing. What she felt was primarily the specific quality of a woman who had organized a complex system and had watched it perform exactly as it was designed to perform, which was a particular quiet satisfaction that was more professional than emotional and that she had been feeling in various forms for 12 years. She also felt the specific quality of something that had been held at arm's length for a long time, finally being permitted to arrive. She had been managing Arthur for 12 years, not with resentment. She had been clear-eyed about the situation from year 2 and had organized herself around it with the practical precision of someone who had assessed the available options and had made a rational choice. But the managing had been a weight, not in the dramatic sense of something crushing, in the specific daily sense of something that required a consistent expenditure of her attention and intelligence that had not been directed at anything she had specifically chosen. She was going to direct her attention at things she specifically chose now. The estate would be hers, not in the immediate legal sense. The proceedings would take time, and that she was comfortable with. But the outcome of the evening she had organized was an outcome with a specific legal shape, which she had understood when she was designing it, and which her solicitor, who had been briefed 3 days before the dinner, was already prepared to manage. Arthur had confessed to fraud, the introduction of a woman under a false identity. He had confessed to the nature of the relationship, which undermined the specific legal framing he had been using. He had admitted to the diamond necklace, which was the family vault, which was a separate matter that the magistrates had heard clearly. She had the private ledger. She had the original letter from the coat lining. She had the estate's financial documentation, which she had organized with the specific completeness of someone who had been preparing for a legal proceeding for 3 months. She was ready. Below, the carriages were being called. She could hear it, the specific machinery of a dinner party concluding, but with the particular quality of an evening that was concluding differently from how it had been expected to conclude when the guests arrived. The magistrates would be leaving with what they had heard, which was substantial. The social arbiters would be leaving with what they had seen, which would be discussed tomorrow and the day after, and for some time beyond that. The Bishop of Millfield would be leaving with the particular expression of a man who had attended a dinner, expecting to observe virtue, and had observed its specific and comprehensive opposite. She heard the carriage. She looked over the balcony. Arthur and Sylvia were being escorted through the main gate, with the quality of people who were not being escorted voluntarily, but who understood, in the specific way of people who had just confessed to things in front of magistrates, that the voluntary or not distinction had stopped being meaningfully operative. Arthur looked up. He saw her on the balcony. She was holding the champagne glass. She was not performing anything. She was simply there, in the June night, in the specific quality of her own estate, which was also his estate, and which was going to require several months of legal proceedings before the specific question of whose estate it was going to be going forward was resolved. But she was on the balcony. He was in the carriage. She raised the glass, not sarcastically, with the specific even quality she brought to all things, the quality of acknowledging a moment that deserved acknowledgement. The carriage moved. She watched it go. She turned back to the night. The estate was quiet. The guests had departed, or were departing. The household staff was managing the clearing with the efficiency she had organized them to manage things, which was the efficiency that had always been the actual operation of the estate, regardless of whose name was on it. She breathed the June air. She thought about what came next. The legal proceedings, which she had prepared for, the social management, which she had also prepared for, the specific work of managing the estate under the changed conditions, which she had been managing under its previous conditions for 12 years, and which she was confident she could manage under the new ones. She also thought about the particular thing she had not been doing for 12 years, which was directing her attention at things she had specifically chosen. She had been making a list, not a literal list. She was not, she thought, with the specific dry quality of someone who had been organizing literal lists for 12 years, going to start the next phase of her life with a literal list. But the inventory of things she had been keeping at the edges, the work she had found interesting but had managed alongside the managing of Arthur, the relationships she had maintained but had not fully invested in because the investing required a quality of presence she had not had available, the particular projects she had been thinking about doing someday had arrived. She had organized it herself. She stood on the balcony until the carriages were no longer visible and until the specific quality of the night had shifted from the charged quality of an evening in which something significant had happened to the ordinary quality of late night in the country, which was the quality of things that were simply themselves without event. She went inside. She poured another glass of champagne. She went to the library, which was the room she had always found most hers, and she sat at the desk, and she opened the private ledger, and she made the final entry, the date, the outcome, a single sentence at the bottom of the last page, written with the specific clean script she brought to all things that needed to be clear. She closed the ledger. She set it aside. She opened the drawer where the things she had been working toward were organized, and she looked at the first document in the stack, which was the specific first thing she had chosen to do, with the attention that was now, finally and completely, hers. She began to read. The estate was quiet around her. She was in it, at the desk, in the library, which was where she had always been the most herself. She was reading something she had chosen. This was, she found, exactly sufficient. Tell me in the comments, which moment stayed with you? Was it the chandelier eyes at the door, the ruby necklace and the distant cousin, the whisper about Scotland, the whisper about the London officer, the package arriving between courses, or the balcony and the raised glass? Drop it below. I want to know what you're carrying from this one. And tell me where you're watching from, your city, your country. Let me know who is in the room tonight. Subscribe and hit the bell, because the next story opens with a woman who discovers, on the morning of her 40th birthday, A package she did not order, containing the diary she lost at 19, and the last entry was written by someone else. I'll see you there.